balmy June Tuesday. My name is Melanie. I'm the author, events coordinator, and assistant manager here at Malaprops, and I want to express my gratitude for all of you for coming out and supporting not only your local independent bookstore, but your local independent authors as well. If you don't know already, we do have these paper calendars that tells you what the events are each month. They're by the registers, or there's some at the counter on your way out the door if you haven't picked one up yet. And I just want to highlight that in September, on September 4th, we do have Louise Penny coming here. We're hosting her at Diana Wortham Theater. If you're a mystery lover, then apparently she is the only one that you need to know about. People are devoted fans of her books and characters. So let's everybody check your cell phones and make sure that they are set to silent. If you are not familiar with the bookstore, there are restrooms in the hallway just this way. And books are for sale behind the counter if you haven't picked yours up yet. And as soon as the talk is finished and the question and answer period is finished, we'll move Stephen over to a table beside the registers over there to sign the books and to talk to you after the event. All right, let's, without further ado, introduce our author for this evening. Stephen Crimi was born in Brooklyn, raised on the streets of Ozone Park, New York City, and has done time as an editor, estate gardener, cook, massage therapist, as well as running a biodynamic garden and fiber farm for 12 years with his wife of 3 decades, Chris. He spent over a decade in traditional yoga study at an ashram in Amityville, New York. Now he and Chris garden and midwife literature. Tonight, he's going to take us on a journey through the cross-fertilization of mystery wisdom cultures with his book, Katabatic Wind. Please welcome Stephen.
Thank you so much. Thank you to Malaprops for hosting me. This is actually my 3rd time reading, doing an event here, but the first time for something that I've done. And it's just really nice. It's a great bookstore. It's a great venue and a great vibe and all that. And it's a great place to talk about the demise of Western civilization. I was going to open up with a Bruce Springsteen joke, but
Oh, go ahead.
well, yeah, obviously you guys didn't get the memo that Bruce Springsteen wasn't going to make it tonight. He canceled out. So, but I will do a 37-minute a cappella Rosalita if you'd like. So this book was written, as a number of essays is written over, really a 20-year period, and then seriously rewritten last year with the help of some of the people that are in the audience tonight. And, we have there's a lot of really nice talent in this audience tonight. There are writers, there are potters, there are people who are carvers, people who just are really, really good at something. And I really appreciate the fact that that my life has been such that I can encounter a lot of people who have some sort of really talent and who are not living, what's sometimes called the American dream, and which is really for many people, unfortunately, the opposite, a nightmare to try to get by. And just the fact that somehow, the creative aspect of them is able to shine forth, and I think that's just terrific. And I know personally that I feel very different when I'm not writing than when I am. That if I'm not churning something inside and working something out, that it's just I just have a whole different relationship to life. So I apologize, I'm drinking ginger tea, which is bringing up my heat, unfortunately, which really doesn't need much help. So So I'm going to do something that I've actually never done in public before. I'm going to give you a little biography, all right, which was actually spoken of briefly. So yeah, so I was born in Brooklyn, New York, and then very soon after that, maybe I was 1 or 2, we moved to Queens. So already there was this template of moving from Kings County to Queens County, getting away from the masculine into the divine feminine. So that imprint was early on, and apparently I have a library card when I was 3 years old in New York, and I don't remember learning to read. I just remember always reading. So I always loved books and loved literature. But we can skip a few years and head towards, at a certain point I got a degree in English literature at Union College in Schenectady, New York, and had an incredible English department there. And I was taught how to think there. I never really learned how to think until that point. And so after college, and met Chris, and we studied in this very traditional yoga center in Amityville, New York, for about 10 years. And the thing about this place is very traditional. In other words, so we studied Sanskrit, we studied the Vedas, we studied the Upanishads, we studied the Bhagavad Gita, all the classical Indian texts, and we studied Sanskrit in order to read them in the original, or at least have a working knowledge of the vocabulary needed there. But then we did something else that changed everything in a lot of ways. So we undertook a study of Western philosophy. So we started with what are called the pre-Socratics. And these are people that I talk about here and there in the book. So in other words, that would be a philosopher who wrote and lived before Socrates. And Socrates was murdered by the Greek constituency in the year 399 BC. So, and then Plato was his student, and Aristotle was Plato's student. But we studied these earlier people. Empedocles is one of them, Parmenides is another one of them, Heraclitus is another one of them, and Pythagoras, maybe the most famous. And so we're reading them, and these guys are saying the same thing as the yogis were saying, that everything is one, that reality in a certain way is an illusion. And so we thought we were reading like yoga mystics, and then once you get to Plato and Aristotle, something else happens. And that something else becomes what is called rationalism. So, in other words, if you read, and you know, this education should be our birthright, and it's not given to anyone unless you specifically take a course in in philosophy, and even if you do, they give these earlier, what I'm going to call mystics, all right, these earlier Greek thinkers. They give them very short shrift. They don't talk about them at all, and they're just considered sort of, like proto-philosophers that, one day they're going to grow up to be Aristotle and, really learn how to think. But the problem is thinking itself, all right? So once you get to Plato and then Aristotle mostly, what happens is called what's called rationalism. Now, rationalism means that you can get to the real through thought. You think you can get to the real through thought. And so, so you have the arguments in Plato where they're arguing back and forth about, what is this, what is that. But the problem is you can never get there through thought, all right? That the people before them were the ones who were mystics, and they made these underground journeys. All right, they would lie still in caves. They would, or the priests and the priestesses would lie still in caves, or they would, the deities would speak through them, or you would lie down in these dark places, or temple precincts. They would always have an underground spot. And in those underground spots, you connect with the divine feminine, you know, especially the goddess of the underworld, Persephone. And subtly, Plato, I wasn't even going to do this, so geez, what am I doing? Anyway, so subtly Plato takes that aspect, all right? So he writes something very famous called the Allegory of the Cave. All right, and the Allegory of the Cave is his metaphor or allegory for reality. So in this depiction, right, so there's a bunch of people sitting like you, and then behind you would be a fire, and in front of the fire, people would carry objects. So you would see the objects as projected in front of you. Does that make sense?
Sure.
Right. So all you're seeing, and you can't turn around. So all you're seeing is these shadows of objects, and you're trapped in this cave. So what Plato has done has taken what was the place everyone went for wisdom and made it the place of ignorance. All right, because you're trapped, you can't see. So all you're seeing in a cave now is these illusions, these shadows. You're not seeing the real, according to him. All right, and so what becomes real is thinking, and the way to thinking is mathematics and things like that. So and then for Aristotle it becomes logic. There's much more logic, and you know, everything becomes separated. So what began with these Western civilizations, and this is what we lost, so here's the big prize early. So what we lost was this underground feminine ability to connect directly with the divine. And what happens later is that thought becomes the way to do it. And it just becomes more and more abstracted from your lived life. So, for example, does the earth go around the sun? Or does the sun go around the earth? Right? Well, every schoolboy will tell you that the earth goes around the sun. But who lives their life that way? That one person who lives their life, you know. So in other words, for us to come to the conclusion that the earth goes around the sun requires all this sort of mathematics and this sort of abstraction from your lived life, from your lived experience, okay? I'm not saying the earth doesn't go around the sun, but in your life, what is happening? So, and the Greeks knew too. You know, it wasn't a discovery of Copernicus, the so-called Copernican revolution. You know, they knew it, but for them, what was more real was their direct experience. All right, and this is a key, because what happens is we get further and further abstracted from our direct experience. You know, throughout the ages, and you have, you know, like the Newtonian, you know, mechanical world that all of a sudden it becomes a clockwork universe, right? So now God just sort of, you know, flips the switch like a model train set or something like that, and goes away and, you know, does whatever God does when he or she goes away, and just leaves the earth alone. So that's the sort of the Newtonian model. And then you get to, you know, somebody like Descartes, I think, therefore I am. So his being, his reality, is based on his thought. I think, therefore I am. Where originally the opposite was true. I am, you know, therefore I cogitate, I think. So what that is my explanation for the mess of everything. All right, the fact of getting to the real through thought. I mean, so it's a spiritual crisis. So the environmental crisis is a spiritual crisis. The political crisis is a spiritual crisis. You know, the refugee crisis is a spiritual crisis. Every friggin' crisis is a spiritual crisis. But none of it is discussed that way. Everything is discussed in terms of thought. So here we have, you know, and people who spend their lives working on environmentalism and say, oh, if we get to 351 carbon parts per atmosphere, we'll be saved. And it's another thought. You have a problem, you just have more thoughts on the problem. Nothing ever gets to the core of the problem, and the problem is thought itself, right? Albert Einstein said you can't solve a problem using the same kind of thought that caused the problem. Well, I would go further and say you can't solve a problem with thought. Thought is the problem. So, that's my biography, geez. So I don't know. So anyways, that's where that leads to, right? So that understanding of the pre-Socratics that we don't have. And I guess I did some other stuff after that, and came here. Yeah, I don't think there's much. Well, anyway. The other thing I wanted to say too was that so we spent this time at this yoga ashram. It was very traditional. It was very beautiful. And what I ended up though at a point where I wasn't feeling. I used to say namaste all the time. Put your hands together, and it's a beautiful thing. But it struck a false note in my heart every time I did it. And they said, well, something's wrong. I'm not a Hindu. It's just not, as beautiful this path was, there was nothing else. 1985, what else was there as a traditional path? There's just the ones that we imported, all right, that came to us from other places because, frankly, all the Abrahamic religions, are kaput. There are not paths to real, they're not paths to God because they've, for a long time, they're mediated. I grew up in a Roman Catholic neighborhood where it was considered diverse because we had German, Irish, and Italian Catholics in the neighborhood. So that was big diversity in those days. I think there was a Lithuanian somewhere. So what was I talking about?
Your biography.
My biography. So anyway, so at the ashram, and so finally I just realized some part of me knew that I need to find my roots in Western civilization. I'm not Indian. I'm not from there, and I'm never going to be a Hindu. As much as I got from that, so that engendered further investigations into these pre-Socratics and what was going on before this civilization, and came to understand that there was a sacred tradition in the West, but it's covered over and nearly impossible to find. So I'm going to do a little reading because that's what I wanted to do rather than talk. But does that make sense? So that's what kind of moved me into looking for this stuff. And so there's a couple of pieces in here. There's one on the myth of Orpheus, and another one on a Rig Vedic poem. And I guess part of the thing to understand is that with these ancient peoples, the world was chanted into existence. The structure of society in the Rig Vedic times was structured by the chant itself. In the Celtic days, they had the same thing going on with the bardic tradition, where they would chant the world into existence. And the opposite is true, because what is the chant that's chanting this world into existence? Well, it's a corporate chant right now. So I'm going to read a little bit from the introduction. All right, so I'm talking about what catabasis is. Catabasis is this underground journey that I was talking about. I should probably explain that right up front. The catabasis is this underground journey that the ancients took, and they would either lie in complete absolute stillness, or somehow they would make this journey. So the reason I mention Orpheus is that he makes a famous one. And that's very important. The Katabatic wind blown here flows biodirectionally. Meteorologically speaking, it whistles down from mountains or Arctic ice sheets, from high to low, journeying from the inaccessible places to the agora, the roiling marketplace. Traditionally, the mountains are from whence wisdom is found and dispensed, the homes of the gods, a place we look up to for aspiration and inspiration. Yet there is another katabasis, from the ancient Greek meaning to go down, to travel from this world to the underworld. There, the chthonic gods and goddesses are just as real, just as powerful, and maybe just a little edgy for being neglected for so long. They were accustomed to an occasional visit: Odysseus, Orpheus, Inanna, Pythagoras, Parmenides, Aeneas, and the Christ, as well as all the unremembered healers and prophet priests. Is a journey of the initiate, to die before you die, thence to live twice born, once of the flesh and again of wisdom, Sophia. Imaginally, so this is the difference between literal thinking and imaginative thinking. It's like the difference between, reading, some Rumi or, reading a newspaper, which most people can't do. Imaginally, this Katabatic wind blows up from these realms, a wisdom carried back within those able to hold to it. Or sometimes it just seeps up through the cracks in our being, like the Pythian oracle priestess altered from subterranean fumes. Often we sense something significant has infiltrated our mundane routine, but its meaning fades like a dissipating dream. There's a third usage for katabasis in the ancient texts, a military retreat or a maneuver from the inland to the coast. Katabasis connecting to both military and initiation has a poignant irony. One of the great losses for Western culture is any form of real initiation. What remains of the coming-of-age rites in the Abrahamic religions is anemic. There are a number of people influenced by indigenous cultures trying to bring potency back to some sort of initiation. But as helpful as those traditional waters are to individuals, as a culture, the West has lost all connection to the sacred spring it arose from. Sadly, there's never salvation from without. And since the initiatory need has to get filled in some way, it gets supplanted by the military. The longing so many young people feel for meaning becomes projected onto a fraudulent gladiatorial romantic ideal. I'm going to read that again because I like it. The longing so many people feel for meaning becomes projected onto a fraudulent gladiatorial romantic ideal. I can't even enjoy a baseball game with some military aspect, being foisted upon it. Then they receive for their trouble an anti-initiation. That is, an investiture, not of wisdom and purposeful life, which is the purpose of initiation within a culture, but of violence and meaningless death. We don't need long sermons on where that has taken us as a civilization. The kernel of these essays, with the original meaning of attempts, is loss, longing for return, and the grief of living in a society without even an inkling of its sacred origin story. The masterpiece of Persian poetry, Jalaluddin's Rumi's massive Mathnawi, begins by showing how all art stems from loss. A reed is cut from the stream bed, and immediately sings of its longing to return home. All true art, sacred art, sublime art, attempts to resonate with our numinous origin. All other art, as James Joyce famously said, is pornography, either enticement or revulsion. So I love everyone knows Rumi, and his huge poem is like 35,000 couplets called the Mathnawi. And the first line of it is about the reed getting torn from the stream bed, all right? So it gets torn from its origin, and then what does it do? It immediately plays about being torn from its origin. I mean, it's lost. So all that separation and loss from our divine origin is the beginning of all art. You know, all art that's true art, which is an attempt to remember or somehow show some trace of our divine origins in something, you know. And if you are a real artist, in my mind, you're always trying to, if you're not within some sort of religion where you're sort of making, you know, Buddha statues according to, you know, certain prescriptions, you're trying to bring out something that's numinous and luminous, you know, that shows some sort of reflection to the sacred. And James Joyce really just hit it on the head, you know, and if you're not doing that, you know, if you're putting excrement on the Mona Lisa or something like that, well, you're just trying to give, you know, it's an attitude of revulsion, you know, or if it's or some kind of, you know, enticement, you know, putting a cupcake on a can of tomato soup, you know. But it's not, you know, it's not art that you know, connects you with the sublime experience. So, but at that longing, so what the interesting thing about this longing is that, you know, our separation from the divine brings about a longing, and you know, all we do is comes out of that longing. If you're making art, if you're just trying to get through the world. But also, there's a longing of the divine that's also even beneath that. The ground of that is the longing of the divine herself, because at that point it's not even, because the divine begins in the absolute, the one, but wants to be known, wants to experience, right? And so the divine has that longing inherent in itself to be experienced. And what happens is, so it moves from the absolute into the many, into manifestation. And according to, you know, the mystic understanding of oneness, and it's not, you know, the illusion is that we think there's this world out there somewhere, you know, whereas, you know, the entirety of the world is within us, and the divine experiences the world through us. So that's the purpose of our sensorium, is to experience the world for the divine. There's no divine out there looking out over things. You know, we're the eyes of the world, the famous Grateful Dead song. The divine looks through us, and if you ever have that experience, it's a little unnerving to realize that the goddess is looking through you, experiencing the world. But I'm running out of time already, which is interesting. So maybe I'll just finish off. I'm going to take another reading. So that's like 2 out of 10. I'll try to find something that maybe something that can end in a cheery note. And while I'm bouncing around, I do want to thank you all for coming. I really appreciate you coming out. All right, so this is part of this Death of Death piece, and it's about the Vedic rishis, and it's mostly it's just an explication of this particular Rig Vedic poem, Asatoma Sadgamaya Tamasoma Jyotirgamaya Mirtirma Amritam Gamaya. So, so carrying me from the Asat, the ground of being, into manifestation, from Asat to Sat, carrying me from darkness, Tamas, to Jyotir, and carrying me from death to what's usually called immortality, but it's actually the fullness of life. So the Rita is this movement of life in the Rig Veda. So I hate to throw vocabulary words at you right now, but you guys are smart. You can deal with it. Everything lawful then happens through the Rita. Rita encapsulates the cosmic, ethical, and liturgical correct order, the norm on which the Vedic chant hangs. The chant, as sung tones using specific tuning systems, itself creates this ordering of experience. The contrast with Indic traditions as they are marketed here now has the current emphasis on some sort of personal enlightenment, self-realization, or an enlightened ego, which from the mystic perspective is an impossibility. The ego is the concealer. Unfortunately, this is what is left in this broken world where the sounding note of every sacred tradition is unrecognizably distorted by its lost progeny. The Rig Vedic Rishi, these are the singer poets of the Rig Veda, the Rishis. The Rig Vedic Rishi fashioned new songs over and over, connecting to the original sound ground, the unmanifest, through the power of Soma. So in the church, Soma was an intoxicating substance of some kind that no one really knows what it is. These songs, because of their emergence from the original tone of the Vedic civilization, necessarily express the sacred order of the Rita, and these chants themselves organize experience in accord with it, expressed through the power of divine speech or the goddess Vach. So Vach in the Rig Vedic, the Vach is a goddess, speech is a goddess, and she precedes all the gods. So all the gods come from her voice. This chanting not only structured the experiential body of the Rishi, but the body of the whole community. It is essential to remember that for the mystic, the body is the unitive entirety of experience, including the senses and the elements felt as out there in what is now ordinary human consciousness. This is the movement from death toward the Rita expressed in the chant. This is the holding together of sacred community. Death is stagnancy, clinging to immovable, rigid perspectives. The Rita is life aligned to the grounding vision enchanted. Global correlates might be the perpetual Druidic choirs of Britain, the songs holding the wisdom of just about any Aboriginal culture, and the Katabatic incubational practices of the ancient Greeks, connecting to gods and goddesses in underworld stillness, bringing back laws, chants, and cures for mortals, cities, and cultures. The original sacrifice is always the movement of the absolute to the 10,000 things. The absolute is alone and wants to be known. A longing desire beats the heart of all creation. In the Vedas, they call this tapas, heat, friction, vibration. Sound is vibration. The absolute sacrifices absoluteness to allow the many to be. What kind of cosmos ensues depends on the efficacy of the chanted vibration. A harmonious cosmos sings from a vibration closer to the original note. A violent, angry cosmos issues from distortions along the pitch continuum. All sacrifice, any time someone acts selflessly, recapitulates the original sacrifice. Vedic death is a culture not born from the sacred vibrations of the Rita. According to the hymns, even the gods become immortal through tapas, through sacrifice. The way to go beyond death, as attested to in the text, is to perform the sacrifice, that is, to live the sacrifice. Immortality for Vedic people cannot be something as mundane as living linear time without end. It is the continuous merging with the timeless ground of being and emerging from it over and over, mana, baked fresh momentarily. So I think that's enough for, and I'll probably just take any questions if you have any. Ronnie.
So I was fascinated by your comment that you were taught how to think in college by a professor. And at the risk of treading on a paradox, I'm curious as to how what you were taught and how that works with thinking and thought is the problem or the issue or
Good question.
so on.
Good question. So, what's the difference between what this sort of being taught how to think?
What were you
Right.
taught, how to think? What was different about that?
I was taught. I should say I was taught how to read, and that's probably closer to it. In other words, how to take a piece of literature, and just understand what is going. And I had a particular professor whose books might be here, Brenda Wineapple. She does a number of biographies, and at the time I just showed up at her office every day and picked her brain continuously, and she let me. So it was really just a matter of opening up another part of you while you're reading, and just being open instead of reading, like I said, literally. Like you'd read a newspaper for facts or information, you're looking for patterns, you're looking for allusions, you're looking for a whole bunch of things that are not on the front of the text. And you do this with any piece of literature. If you're reading Moby Dick, this is what you have to do. What is the whale? It's not just the whale story, right? What is the whale? Is it the subconscious? Is it the unconscious? Is it whatever?
It's layers of intent.
There's so many, so that's just the way, and there's no answer. The answer is you encountering the text. Just like there is no, I'm saying all this stuff about, what's going on, all that. There's no answer. The answer is your life. How you deal with it, what you do, what you do in the face of all this. That's the only answer. There's no like prescription, we should all go out, and recycle,
Well, I'd just like to say that while you were reading, I was aware, without getting too woo-woo here, that you were accessing a different frequency with when you were actually embodying what you were saying. It's coming from you, so it's true. And it's a different tone or frequency as your normal speech. That's the first time I experienced that, so I thought that was maybe related to my quickie question.
Well, there's nothing in this book, including the bad things, that's not in me. When I talk about the violence of Western civilization, we just had friends who didn't get robbed, but the robbers were there across the street. And in my head, the response was violence. I had violent thoughts about, very creative violent thoughts about what sort of retributive thing would happen, right? So not only that, but there's nothing in this book